Good morning, everybody. My name is Duncan Baker-Brown. I teach here at the University of Brighton. I teach architecture, and I'm in practice. And I think I've spoken at most green architecture days over the years. I'm the architect for the Waste House, and I'm not going to talk too much about that because Kat Fletcher, who worked with me on the Waste House, will be speaking about that later. But I think, bar one person, I think I've worked with everybody who's speaking today. And as ever, Green Architecture Day puts together an incredible lineup. So well done, Bryn and the team, for that. Much more interesting than EcoBuild. I want to talk about the hidden consequences of architecture initially. These are the issues that focus my attention and inspire my work. And I often show this shot, so bear with me, but that is an aerial view of a bit of a protected rainforest and with illegal mines. It's very difficult not to be using what comes out of these mines in your construction projects. The minerals coming out of these mines are in our supply chain, as these people are. That's two pictures spliced together, but that's an open cast copper mine, and again, it's very difficult not to be using these people who produce the copper we use in our buildings. There's been quite a lot of talk about people dying on building sites in Qatar and other places. I think it's really good that it's out there. People are concerned about it. It's not just that Wayne Rooney's going to get, he'd probably be too old for that World Cup, but he can't play in the heat. It's people can't build in the heat either. As you can see, there's estimates that over 4,000 people might die making those stadia. Meanwhile, over here, we're being forced to squeeze the last bit of the fossil fuels out of our ground. And I couldn't help but reflect that our government is sort of encouraging us to burn our way out of recession. They can't get off the old mode, the old way of doing things. Very similar to what happened to my grandparents, who all four of them lived in London and were encouraged to burn coal fires through the night straight after the Second World War, not because they needed to be warm, but because the coal industry needed rebooting. And then we've got this we're now in the construction industry. It's live and kicking again, apparently. And this is how we normally build. We're wasteful. So for every 5 houses built in the UK, the equivalent of 1 house worth of waste is sent to landfill. So we're very cleverly, if you think about bigger projects with our so-called hard-nosed developers, we've been able to persuade them to throw away 1/5 of all the material they buy. Just remember, there's only one planet here. Brighton is still the UK's only city that's bought into a One Planet Living Action Plan. If everybody on planet Earth lived like we do in this room, you would need 3 planets Earth's worth of stuff. So we've got to change these linear metabolisms. I've nicked this from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Very interesting foundation that Ellen MacArthur, the yachtswoman, set up after sailing around planet Earth and reflecting and bumping into a lot of waste along the way. But this is how we exist at the moment. We find stuff, we plunder it, we make it into something and we throw it away. But this is what we need to do. We need to turn our linear metabolisms into circular ones. And that's what's particularly interesting me. So it's all about managing resources, but we're not historically very good at it, unfortunately. It does get a bit more cheery in a minute, don't worry. That's the last 23 North American bison, photographed 102 years ago, just before 10 more were shot. Every North American bison alive now is related to one of those there. Now, the good news is that in terms of an aspiration towards a more sustainable lifestyle, China used to do it very well until the early 1990s. It has, for a long time, had large cities, but those cities functioned as circular metabolisms. The city waste from the city fed the hinterland, and the hinterland fed the city. That all changed when McDonald's turned up in 1990. These are sort of very obvious, but God, it's hammering it home all the time as issues to go by. It seems to be quite difficult, but we really do need to reduce the consumption of stuff in our everyday lifestyles and whatever practice we have. Whatever we do as a job, we need to reduce the consumption of stuff before we think about reusing, before we're thinking about recycling. And if you're an architect or a builder, you need to design for demolition, design for remanufacture. consider your building project as a material resource for someone else in the future. We also need to reduce the amount of raw materials consumed. And that's something that a lot of large international corporations are taking very seriously. I'm concerned about the way raw materials are mined and found from the point of view of environmental and social reasons. But Apple, for example, are concerned because of resource security. So their latest iPhone 6, they've actually constructed the physical and virtual infrastructure to take the phones back. They want your phone back. They realize that, I think the statistic was true for the iPhones up to the iPhone 5, that there's more gold in a ton of iPhones than there is in a ton of gold ore. So they've been throwing that away previously, but now they know that they want it back. And it's exciting, this area of reuse, because I was at a conference a couple of months ago, and there's a guy standing next to me, and he was wearing jeans from a company called Mud Jeans, and he was leasing the jeans. So Mud want that material back. And that's, I think, the way of the future. It's corporate responsibility. But some people have been clever with materials and waste materials, or so-called waste materials, for years, and this is 20 years old now. This is a chapel designed by a practice called Rural Studio. And they're based in Alabama, and Alabama is a poor state. It's a practice, and it's also a school of architecture. And if you the last year at that school of architecture, you're charged with designing a building and building it. And that building has to be for people in the local community who are, on the whole, very poor and very disenfranchised. And this is a chapel designed by 4 students and built for about $30,000. And that's not a lot of money, so they have to scavenge. And the walls of this chapel are made with 85 Chevrolet car windscreens they found in a breaker's yard. Most of what you're looking at is salvaged. Here's 2 slides put together. The slide on the left is a rural studio student's accommodation clad with car number plates. The image on the right is a load-bearing wall from a building using, sorry, I thought there was another slide, there isn't. I cut my slides down to be quick. Anyway, that is a wall made out of carpet tiles. So synthetic plastic carpet tiles, never used. 36,000 of them were found still in their cardboard boxes, about to go to landfill. In Alabama, you can make load-bearing walls out of carpet tiles. Shigeru makes buildings out of cardboard tubes. Even permanent buildings. This is Christchurch's replacement cathedral. That's cardboard rolls for a roof. Here we've done it for a number of years. This was our student pavilion that exhibits their student work in May. And that building there was made entirely out of waste from a nearby construction site. That was in 2011. There are other things that you can do to build in a more sustainable way. Use second-hand materials is a good idea, but it is complex. But the other thing is to go local. And local is good for a number of reasons. If you go local, you're going to reduce air miles, road miles, sea miles, the carbon footprint of the material that you've chosen to use. If you really do go local, you could generate or regenerate local economies. You could also, which is really interesting for me, do the antithesis of what we've had for 75 years, which is this international style of architecture. So you don't know where you are in the world, it's just a glazed tower block wherever. If you use local materials and local labour, you might get to rediscover a sense of place, a sort of new vernacular, a way of doing things locally. This is a building we did in 2001, where we set ourselves the challenge of constructing a new building in Romney Marsh, near Dungeness, out of materials that were within 75 kilometres of the site. So that was what that little diagram there is all about. And so we made a building out of straw and shingle, because that's what there's lots of, and a bit of timber. It was a triple SI site, a site of special scientific interest. And our ambition had been to avoid concrete, but a sharp-eyed of you will see that there's a few concrete padstones there. We dug down, and the first thing we found was that there were 2 cars buried on the site. So even though it was now a triple SI, it had been a landfill site. So we did have to put a couple of concrete piles down. But the foundations are shingle. Ingabion walls. And also the bit in the middle, the oversight, instead of being a concrete slab, is compressed aggregates. So basically, the ground floor of this building is made out of compressed stones of different densities and sizes. In fact, above the next layer that went on there was a layer of insulation made out of that sort of clay vermiculite. So again, it was just aggregates that could be dug up again one day. So this building was designed for demolition. And then, not to steal Ian's thunder, I won't dwell on too much. I don't know how to do this, but experts do, and you might hear from one later. Anyway, so this was a straw bale building. So you're starting out of the ground with straw that came from north of the site, from the wheel just north of the site. We didn't do a load-bearing straw bale building. You can see there's a timber frame there. But what was nice about that is we didn't have to be too good at it, and anyone could have a go at doing the straw bales. So, and our windows in this case were missing bales. And then we just literally put lime render on both sides of it. And because lime needs a little bit of time to go off, we had to shade the building. And we put a sedum roof on at the time. I'm very much into organic sort of hayseed roofs now, but this at the time did the job, and actually 14 years later still looks really good. The nice thing about a growing roof, the biodiversity is one thing. The other thing is it's protecting the membrane below from solar degradation. And it also provides insulation, so you don't overheat in the summer and you don't get too cold in the winter. So it's very useful. Now this building just looked like a cowshed really. But it was the first public building made of straw in the UK. And we got this sort of accidental sense of the place. So that's the place on the left there, and that's the materials on the right. So you begin to get something that reflects where it's from. You can do it at different scales. This was a building in Hastings. We were asked to retrofit and extend it, but the building was 40 years old and it had concrete cancer. So we had to demolish most of it, but we were intent on salvaging whatever we could. So the building was constructed on the slope, and so we were able to salvage the concrete slab and retaining wall. And then we built up in a frame, the superstructure was sweet chestnut. So Coppice sweet chestnut from within 12 miles of the site, actually. The road miles were actually incurred. The road miles incurred were taking the glue laminated structures up to Tunbridge to be refined and then coming back. But this is a mega structure made out of small section Coppice sweet chestnut. And then we made a timber frame and infilled it with flax insulation, overclad it with waste timber fiberboard insulation and render and chestnut. And that's the underside of the roof of the building. That is all chestnut, every bit of timber there. And that's the cafe. It's a really nice building. It's got what they call a community cafe, which I think sounds patronising, but it's right in the middle of quite a difficult estate. And the front kitchen there is a demonstration kitchen. It's got another kitchen behind. And they actually grow a lot of the vegetables next to the building. So that was the building soon after opening, and the timber there again is chestnut, of course. And you can apply this to bigger buildings. This is a 7-storey building in Hastings, an office building. It's 7 stories of sheep's wool and timber fiberboard and lime render. Now the other issue to consider if you want to design in a very low impact way, local materials are brilliant. There's so many different things that come out of this idea of using local organic materials, not least a non-toxic building. 21st century buildings that have to be well sealed and well insulated often overheat, and they start to percolate, the air starts to percolate. And if you finished your building with synthetic materials, as Bryn alluded to, you're going to get sick building syndrome. But the other thing is, referring back to my statistics that we waste 1 house worth of stuff for every 5 houses we build, is this idea of zero waste on site. And that's something that's informed my practice quite a lot over the years. Now what you will see is a lot of these sorts of schemes, which is shipping containers, because they're good. There's a lot of them, and you can turn buildings into shipping containers into buildings. So this is a famous one up in Shoreditch, Box Park, and it's the shopping centre at the end of the day. This is one of the first ones up near the Isle of Dogs in London. That's okay. And this is a flash one in Holland, and this is the one we have in Brighton. Doesn't look quite so alluring, but it has got a nice organic roof on top of it. I think it's limiting, but the point is that here you've got reuse and prefabrication. And this is a scheme that we're looking at in our office for doing a similar thing, but using organic materials. And this is another scheme that we're looking at, again using organic materials. And just to prove that it can be done, in 2008, I did a prefabricated house built in 6 days with the help of Roland, who's in the audience. And we proved that you could use fluffy organic materials and build a zero waste building by doing it in a prefabricated way. So we use these mod cell panels downstairs. So you have an expensive engineered box and as cheap as chips infill, which in our case was straw. And then you use the lime render again, like you had at Romney Warren Visitor Centre. And then up it went. We used a thatch wall as well. It was a TV program as well, so just to prove you could do different things, we had the vertical thatch. So we had the heavyweight stuff downstairs, and then upstairs we had these lightweight boxes. And these were designed with a 3D computer program. I never saw traditional working details for this. Just it was a 3D model. And every box is numbered, and we start with a pile of sustainably manufactured ply, non-toxic glue, sustainably sourced timber, and then a CNC flatbed router which cuts it, and it's computer controlled. And it cuts out all the shapes. You have hardly any waste. The factory is really near site, and you get these boxes. And the great thing is they're lightweight. So it was easy to haul these things up to the first floor. So we have the heavyweight stuff downstairs and the lightweight stuff upstairs. And the holes in it are waiting for cellulose waste paper insulation to be blown in. And this went up in 4 or 5 days. And here we have the finished results. The idea was that it was called the house that Kevin built. So the story was it was meant to be the house that Kevin MacLeod designed. And it was an upside down house with his bedroom and bathroom downstairs. So that's the bathroom there with water bottles creating the wall for the shower. And this ply interior upstairs. And one of my favourite things was this. It was a cardboard chair that, when you got your friends around, expanded out to a cardboard sofa. And it had one of the first fully integrated solar roofs. So solar panels that are the roof finish rather than a roof finish plus solar panels. And I found out about the system on the left there from coming to Green Architecture Day. So that was really good. And we finished it in 6 days. And in the middle of I haven't got a slide for some reason, but in the middle of that plan, because it was such a lightweight box, I was really concerned about overheating. So we had Roland do a 1.5 story exposed rammed earth wall right in the middle, a spine in the middle of the house. And he did that in 12 hours, I think, didn't he? It was a long 12 hours. But what was amazing was mixing these organic materials with the precision of a computer. So this is the cladding upstairs on the outside. You can see that it's louvers and they're different sizes, and there's a sort of external mitered joint and a shadow gap, and it's cutting around the downpipe. That was all done in Hoxton, which was about 4 miles away from this site in central London, and we didn't have to redo anything. Now, if we had it done on site with a typical labour force, there would have been a pile of waste because of that complexity. So what really interests me is where you use precision engineering and where you use labour, and we use both. It was the UK's first A+ rated dwelling as well, but it was only up for two days, and then it was dismantled and dispersed back to the people that supplied the materials. But it was a building that focused on locking carbon dioxide, because there is this rush to burn it, as well as other fossil fuels. But you get a big green tick at the moment if you install a log burning stove and start burning logs. We're proving here you don't have to burn this stuff; you can use it. How long have I got, Brit?
You've got another 5-10 minutes.
Good. So, for more than 15 years, I've been preoccupied with building and still do construct buildings using locally sourced organic materials for all their benefits. But in about 2012, I was drawn to the issue of waste and the amount of waste we create. Initially via the construction industry, which consumes about 50% of stuff that's mined on planet Earth, one way or another. And then I was drawn to these ocean gyres. Now, every ocean, the gyre is the current that prevails in the ocean. But in the middle of these gyres, you have vast areas of plastic. So the size of Texas or France, whatever you can get your head around. I did a conference here a couple of years ago where one of the contributors was a yachtsman from Australia, and he'd travelled from Australia to Japan. It's a 3,000-mile trip. It was Melbourne to Japan, I can't remember what town it was in, or city it was in Japan. He'd done the trip in 2002, and he'd survived by fishing off the back of his boat every day. And he was about to do it again in 2013. And his friend that had done it the year before said, you need to take your own food. He said, no, I'll just do what I did last time. He said, if you do that, you'll starve. So he took his processed food. And sure enough, for 3,000 miles, he was just going through a quiet ocean and dodging plastic. And in some places, you couldn't dodge the plastic. So something's happened. One thing is that just about every bit of plastic ever created in the last 102 years is still with us. And we can't help but exist as we do because of plastic. But when we throw it away, there is no away. It ends up in our oceans. Some of it is burnt, but most of it is still with us. And it basically hangs around in our oceans, and it's in our food chain now. So we need to do something about it. There's a nice sort of shot of what we're talking about. But you can go through the oceans and not see anything as obvious as that. It does begin to break down and be a bit more like semolina. And that is why, one of the reasons I built this thing. So this thing was designed initially to be built out of waste construction materials. But it ended up being, half of it was waste construction materials and half of it was the stuff that you and I throw away on a day-to-day basis. And I was hanging around and hanging on to this strapline, which is that there's no such thing as waste, there's just stuff in the wrong place. Now, the positive issues out of all of this, because we are a consumer-led economy, and planet Earth, that's the way it's gone, is that the mining of raw materials is costing more and more. And people are getting taxed, quite rightly, for throwing stuff away. So the sensible money stays in the middle in the world of the circular economy. And that's where Apple is. And by the way, they're the biggest company in the world at the moment. So I'm not pro-Apple, but I just think it's good that we're at a time now where even the biggest company in the world has to think in a circular way. Other people have been doing it for years, of course. Anyone that's involved in permaculture, that's what it's all about. But you've got other people coming on board now, and this is a design organisation from Holland called Superuse. There's Superuse Studio, who are the architects that design and build buildings made out of other people's rubbish. And then there's this superuse.org, which is an archive of different sort of upcycling, hacking, whatever you want to call it, projects at totally different scales, from a chair to a city. And everybody's getting involved in it. Pharrell Williams launched a range of jeans last August, where they've got this sort of bionic yarn, which the centre of the yarn is actually made out of reclaimed plastic from our oceans. Those jeans are made out of waste plastic. Has anyone read Cradle to Cradle? You had it? Well done. Good book. Anyway, so I'm going to end with a couple of projects that I'm working on at the moment. And one thing I learned from Superuse is their technique called harvest mapping. And this is where I go to end up with the question, what are sustainable materials? If you think planet Earth is covered with the detritus of our existence, we've got a new geological layer. We're in the Anthropocene era at the moment, and that geological layer is the human-made stuff, whether it's cities, landfill sites, or plastic in our oceans, or whatever. So there is an idea that we should just use what's on the surface of planet Earth, the stuff we've created. Why dig up anything more? It's cheaper is it not, to use the stuff lying around? So this is a map of Sussex, and we have a site in the middle of their place near Framfield. And we did what Super used to, which is to do a harvest map. We literally, using Google Earth and other connections, just thought, what's lying around? And so we spoke to Nigel Braden, who was the person who did the research that proved that sweet chestnut, locally sourced sweet chestnut from coppices, was more durable than oak. He said, right, we've got a bit of sweet chestnut, but what we have loads of is this. So we've got this softwood that nobody uses, but we happen to have a Forestry Commission forest being chopped down, and there's loads of it. It will be burnt, or at best go to paper. So Nigel's looking at designing a construction system made out of this low-grade timber. We're going to use it for a house. We went up the road from our office to Chailey Brickworks. They have hundreds of thousands of overcooked and undercooked bricks on site. They normally use them just to fill the holes that they dig. Some of these bricks, they actually still do the traditional way of making bricks, which is to make an oven out of bricks and fire the new bricks inside. Those bricks that make the oven get used 5 times and then thrown away. There's nothing wrong with them. We're going to use them to make in a construction of a house. We've also got lots of chalk. That's one thing we realise with the waste houses. There's lots of chalk around, obviously. Anytime you dig down on the South Downs, you've got chalk. We're going to try and use it as a form of chalk called clunch. We're going to try and use it for the oversight of the house. And this is us trying to describe what we're going to do. So from the ground upwards, we're using low-grade material that other people would normally avoid. And then you can take that on to existing places. So a lot of people want that to be demolished so they can rebuild it and make more money. We've got to work with our cities. Brighton, we mustn't be demolishing towers. The tower at City College is going to come down to build another tower. This is madness. These are the things we've got to work with. This is my last thing I'm going to dwell on. This is the before and after shot of a 1950s tower that was down in Paris due for demolition. Isn't it ugly? Let's get rid of it. But where's it going to go? So it was due for demolition and rebuild. They priced it. It was something like a £35 million project. And the architects called Lacatan and Vassal went to the mayor of Paris and said, we'll give you your new tower for 2/3 the price. Immediately got the guy's attention. 8 years later, though, he came back to them and said, we'll do that. So you're looking at the same tower before and after, but instead of demolishing it, that grey rectangle on the left is the footprint of the tower. The white rectangle, H-shaped rectangle on the right with the orange bits is the same tower with new bits bolted on. So what they did is remove the concrete panels and replace it with what's called a winter garden. So it's a glazed box with a solid floor. The glazed sides slide, and what you're doing is extending every flat with a new environmental buffer zone that hugely increases natural light into the rooms, gives you better ventilation, and by the way, insulates the building at the same time. So there it is as it was on the left, and there's the first phase of the works. They took the panels off and put the new double glazed sliding doors on with the flap down floor waiting to happen. That's what you can see there. They did it in the same day, so the tenants weren't asked to leave. They did it while they were there. And that's the flat before, small windows, rather grim. And this is it going up. So you wrap the building in new accommodation. And it ends up looking like luxury flats. You might not like the look of it, but it's a very clever idea. So this is the new accommodation. This is sheltered housing for poor, old people. So that's what we need, these sorts of good ideas. And we're looking at doing it in Brighton as well. That's the scheme in Brighton for doing exactly the same sort of thing. Boom. Even Brighton College are into it. I'll end with that. That's a tower that's going to be extended in Oslo. The interesting thing is what the architects are asking for. They're saying they're going to extend and overhaul this tower. They're going to salvage 90% of the material when they strip out and reuse that 80% of that 90% on their actual building. So that's the world we're in at the moment. But I ask you, what are sustainable materials? Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan, and thank you for the first time in the history of Green Architecture Day for keeping your talk within the time.
So another thing.
We've got 5 minutes if anyone's got any questions. And a note to Duncan and our speakers in the audience, we can hear your questions, but you won't be able to hear each other's questions, so please repeat them in the answers. So, Fionn.
Duncan, where can you find information about you refabbing these Brighton buildings that you had? You rushed through just at the end there. Is there somewhere we can find information about?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No, the Brighton refurb stuff is interesting because it's confidential at the moment. I probably shouldn't have even shown it, but what I'm saying is it's actually really exciting times. Local authorities are charged with building again. Now, Brighton is fascinating because it's in a biosphere. It's a one-planet living city. It's constrained by Worthing and Eastbourne, the South Downs and the Channel. And by the way, they want to densify it. They need to. So from a point of view as a sort of an urban designer architect, that's fascinating because what we're being asked to look at is increasing the density on sites, making it more beautiful than it is at the moment, and halving the carbon footprint. So it's just the sort of work I want to be looking at, actually. How do you do that, really? So, that's exciting, but it's at the moment it's controversial because it's confidential. And it's confidential because they're just looking at different sites to say, what if? But I have to say that when I was running a design studio in the university, it's exactly the work we did in 2009, 2010, looking at Brighton and asking those questions. I mean, Brighton's very well placed to be able to answer these questions because it's got so much local expertise, he says, playing to the balcony. But it's true. Are there any other questions?
So in the white.
Yeah. Is there any sort of difference in planning applications that you need to be aware of, or more complicated to build sort of eco houses as opposed to traditional houses?
No, there isn't. I would argue that
planning applications.
If you want to do a plan, do you mean planning or building regulations? Planning. Is it more difficult to design eco buildings from the point of view planning? It depends what you're proposing. The sort of almost sometimes lost leader headline is always the solar panels. So the other thing, though, is we've looked at schemes for overcladding, doing external wall insulation on Victorian terraces, whole streets. And it's doable, but you do need to think collectively. So we looked at the feasibility of overcladding the whole of Southampton Street, just that way. And, it needed a Section 106 agreement, which is an agreement. It's a sort of, what would you call it, a legal agreement with the planning department. Because what they were saying is, once if everybody at the beginning buys into it, all the different neighbours, all 50 people, and then one or two back out. So I don't think there are any more constraints really than there are for traditional. Certainly not in the construction. If you know what you're doing, and that's why today's exciting, everyone you're going to speak to is out there actually doing this stuff. You have a grown-up conversation with building control, and they understand. They tend to be very supportive, I find. I mean, Brighton's well served with building control. The head of building control is very forward-thinking. I mean, we've got the thing about the waste house is it's got full planning approval, but more crucially, it's got full building regulations approval. So that's with the support of Brighton and Hove City Council.
And one last question.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. You've raised two slightly different topics. One is about using natural materials, and the other one is about the issues we have around the plastic globally. I would like to know what your opinion is on the way we currently use plastic within buildings. There's a building being built newly, which is a eco house, but it has a lot of plastic in it. As I understand it, it has no longer a lifespan than any of the other plastics. How do you square this business of
Normally I try to avoid plastic, so I'm not a big fan of plastic. But there are different issues. I think there's the clearing up issue that needs to be addressed. So I think we've got to look at ways of clearing up the plastic and adding value to waste plastic. Otherwise, it just won't be cleared up. But I am concerned about plastic in the built environment because it off-gasses. I've had people stand in the waste house saying, this is dreadful, it should be made out of organic, non-toxic materials. And I say, yeah, but that's not what the house is about. It's about pointing out where stuff comes from and where it ends up. And did you realise, we collected 25,000 toothbrushes in 4 days for the waste house. This is stuff that's never used and just thrown away. So the waste house is about a polemic, getting people thinking. But I'm really concerned that internal environments, because we spend so much time inside buildings, need to be healthy spaces. And so that I think if you can avoid plastics, that's a good idea. Is that okay? Yeah, that's where I'm coming from, really.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you.